4 and we are starting 10 minutes later, so we will go to the 10 minutes. We've got an excellent panel here and 10 minutes means a lot to us. So, welcome all to this session 5 on regional dimension, the second part of it. And I mean, it just struck me that formulation of our conference title, Quest for Global and Regional. And I wonder whether there was any reason for putting global before the regional. Normally we put regional and global. So maybe increasingly we talk of the global village, and so the global has shrunk, but the region is becoming more important. But if we look at the area that is being covered in these 2 sessions on regional development, it's practically the entire world. And you know, it's very interesting listening to the entire discussion since yesterday. What strikes me as very, very significant is that the post-World War II international order, the intersystemic order that came into being, has played itself out most tellingly in this region. We start with the rise of communist China, which first shifted the Cold War theater from Europe to Asia. The communist China which brought the spotlight of Cold War rivalry onto Asia, East Asia specifically. Towards the end of the 20th century, we started to hear about the rise of Asia, the four dragons. And by the turn of the century, the spotlight is again on Asia because of the rise of China. So in a sense, it's quite interesting the way in which the wheel has turned. But the important thing is that the way in which regions, regionalism or regional orders are being conceptualized, these are not static or very fixed kind of formations. In fact, the whole notion of a region or a regional order, regionalism itself, has undergone a huge transformation over the past half century. And if there's anything that is, if I can think of anything more dialectical, then the way in which we are conceptualizing the region is itself shaping the way regionalism is unfolding. And hence, it's important to understand what are the new factors which are shaping both our perceptions and the way in which the regions are being. And certainly, China is at the center of this entire discourse on the new kind of regions. But taking off from what Professor Monti had said during the session here, he spoke about the last session was all about inequities, the way in which leaders in our own country had started to talk about shared destinies, about what Prasenjit Dwara has been speaking about, the global Asia. Kamsing's book was also referred to about India, China and the connections. I think it's important that we bring this notion of connectivity, interlinkages across historical periods to bear on the way in which we try and deal with the new region. I think if we forget these connectivities or these kind of connections across history, we come to very static approaches, whereas what are required are multiple approaches which are grounded in history, culture, to shape the way in which we do. So that in one way, this has to be our response, the way in which many people have expressed certain apprehensions about the way China is shaping the new discourse. I think through an examination of different regional theaters and their experiences, we need to give more play to this multiplicity of approaches. And I think for that we have an excellent panel here. We have Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, Dr. Chalziza, Professor David Arase, and Ambassador Vishwanathan. Now, you all have had this booklet the last day, so I'm not going to spend my time introducing this very distinguished panel, which needs no introduction. in any case, I simply request Ambassador Raghavan to present.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One of the things that President Obama did when he wanted to insult Russia was to call it a regional power. So I don't think that we should look at the China-Russia relationship in a regional context, because both of them look at it as a partnership for global things. But it's probably not so well known that President Xi Jinping's first trip abroad as president was to Russia. Russia was the first foreign country that he visited. And this was before the Ukraine crisis and before everybody said that Russia has been pushed into a Chinese embrace. China felt it necessary to reach out to Russia right at the beginning. And of course, much later in 2016, I think, Xi Jinping again said that, China-Russia relations have been, this is the best ever in history in terms of China-Russia relations. Now, history, of course, the history of China-Russia relations has been conflict, the Soviet Russia, in fact, the Russian Empire and the Qing dynasty. It's been full of conflict and tension. And once again, it's not often realized that much of what is the Russian Far East today was actually part of Chinese territory. Right up till 1858, 1860, the treaties of Aigun and treaties of the Convention of Peking Convention of 1860 is what actually moved the Russian borders physically across something like 700,000 kilometers to the Pacific coast. And that has tremendous strategic consequence today as well, because that is what provided Russia or Soviet Union with a warm water port on the Pacific coastline, and that enabled the Pacific Naval Fleet, that bolstered its credentials as a naval power, superpower. The obverse side of it is that China today, if this move had not taken place, would not have had the strategic handicap that everyone has been talking about yesterday and today, about a restricted ocean access and about the lack of the raw material and natural resources which it now craves from Russia. Now, obviously the Treaty of Aigun and the Peking Convention were, if they were not unequal treaties, you do not know an unequal treaty when you see one. And Master Menon talked yesterday about one of the basic underpinnings of Chinese foreign policy is to overturn historical humiliation. And this was a historical humiliation. This is something that has to be in the mind of every Russian strategic planner. You might think that it's not easy in today's world to reverse 700,000 square kilometers of territory, move it from one country to another. But it's something that when you have a Far East which is sparsely populated, facing a country which is across the border, I mean, it's a ratio of something like 6 million to 90 million across the border. You have to be looking, you have to be wary about what is happening in that border and what is happening in that region. And that is a background to Russia-China relations which will remain an important background, whatever the current situation in China-Russia relations is. I think that's something that needs to be remembered. In fact, there's a very senior Russian minister who told his counterpart quite recently that when he'd gone to a military establishment in China, he actually found the pre-1858 map of Chinese borders very prominently displayed. But of course, after the Cold War, the Russians and the Chinese kissed and made up. And when they kissed and made up, they saw enormous economic complementarities and military complementarities as well. Russia's strength in energy reserves, raw materials and military technologies was exactly the areas of Chinese hunger. And of course, they now have a 4,000-kilometer long border, 4,000 kilometer plus, providing easy access. So Russia was inevitably sucked into, both of them were sucked into a mutually profitable economic engagement. Bilateral trade rose from something like 5 billion in 1992 to some well over 100 billion in 2014. Because it fell thereafter because of first its devaluation of the ruble, it fell in dollar terms, and Russian recession, sanctions, and the whole lot. But then again on the rise. Military sales rose from $1 billion in 1992 to something to about $3 billion a year in 2005 at the peak. But even in this time of intense economic cooperation and intense military cooperation, there was always a strategic reserve in certain areas of cooperation between Russia and China, and I think that's something that Russia made very clear. It was about Chinese economic presence in the Far East, Russian Far East, particularly in energy and in agriculture. Reasons are obvious. And in the level of military technologies that Russia supplied to China. And that actually is probably the reason why after 2005 the Russian military sales to China fell rather steeply. There was the Chinese military industry had become strong enough to demand the kind of high-level technologies that Russia was unwilling to give to them. There was also this issue which had arisen by then about the reverse engineering of Russian military supplies, which obviously undermined the Russian competitiveness in other areas. And it was perhaps not coincidental that was also the time when the India-Russia military sales picked up greatly, and in fact reached levels which were higher than what the Russian-Chinese military trade were on an annual basis. Now, notwithstanding the strategic reserve, there were obviously a number of grounds on which Russia and China built a very strong political partnership, and that's undeniable. Both are permanent members of the UN Security Council. One seeking to regain its great power status, the other rapidly advancing towards it. Both differing with Western perspectives on governance, seeking greater participation in global economic governance. So there were a lot of binding features, but the consciousness that an excessively close Chinese embrace would inhibit Russia's independence of action was always there, and that expressed itself also in such configurations as, Primakov's idea of a Russia-India-China construct, which President Putin, when he came to office, very eagerly embraced. India was, of course, much less enthusiastic about it in the initial stages, but it then expanded to BRIC, which was a greater comfort level for India, and then BRICS, of course, when the Chinese brought in South Africa. By the way, Chinese bringing in South Africa into BRICS was an early indicator of their ambitions for the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia, in fact, also in the early 2000s was very keen that India should join the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, again as a sort of balance against China. But eventually, when India did get into the SCO, along with Pakistan, the scenario had changed very greatly. And many of the original premises of the Russian advocacy for India to join the SCO had gone, had changed. Again, in the search for for Russia to be an independent pole in global affairs, President Putin also persisted with efforts to sustain the US relationship in spite of the fact that it was coming under tremendous strain with the NATO advancement towards Russian borders, the deployment of NATO missile defenses all along its western borders. The effort to co-opt Europe into an economic partnership also continued, based also on Europe's own ambitions as articulated in the Lisbon Agenda of 2000. These were all efforts that Russia was making to put itself on the global scene slightly separating itself from the sole partnership with China. The concept of this economic partnership from Vladivostok to Lisbon was one such articulation. Now, in all this, of course, India became a part of Russia's effort, the strategic partnership with India, but India could not deliver to Russia the kind of benefits that China could, given its location, its situation on the world stage. But the real game changer in Russia-China relations was, of course, 2014, when the total break with the West caused by the Russian action in Crimea in March 2014. We call it the accession or annexation of Crimea, depending on your religion or political persuasion. But basically, as the West sought to isolate Russia and put a financial stranglehold on it, China's political support in multilateral fora became much more important, particularly as a permanent member of the Security Council, and its economic cooperation became particularly valuable as well. So Russia was inexorably locked into a much tighter embrace of China than it had perhaps bargained for. Particularly in the early post-Crimea period, I think this was very clearly evident. Russia really flaunted its China relationship at every available international opportunity, and China played along as well. The so-called pivot to Asia became largely a pivot to China. President Putin and President Xi have had something like more than 20 meetings since 2014, according to one count. And a few months ago, Russia conferred its highest state award to President Xi in recognition of his contributions to the bilateral partnership. As efforts are being made to curtail Russia's dominance in the European gas market, Russia and China have agreed to accelerate the building of gas pipelines to China. The first pipeline is under construction, transporting 38 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia to China over 30 years. It is expected to be operational in 2019. There was a lot of skeptics who thought that this project would not go ahead. It has gone ahead, and it's gone ahead roughly according to schedule as well. And more such projects are being planned. This is basically a long-term insurance against disruption of Western supplies, but it also is a long-term commitment to the China relationship. And then think back to the Russian reluctance to let China invest on a large scale in Far East projects. Just the other day, President Putin launched the first LNG tanker from the Arctic seaboard of the major Yamal LNG project, a $27 billion project. And who are the investors in CNPC, the Chinese petroleum company, the 20% stakeholder. The China Silk Road Fund holds another 10% in this. And some of us here would remember, I think Ambassador Menon would remember this very well, that before Russia went to China, Russia actually came to India and sought investment in this project. We had this dramatic scene of the Russian Deputy Prime Minister dragging along the CEO of this project, Mikkelsen, to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to tell him this is a good project, please tell your ONGC to invest in it. We didn't, China did. Anyway. President Putin now goes further. He now talks about a cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union and the Silk Road Economic Belt in the land segment of the initiative. Discussions are also underway on the use of the Northern Sea route, which China is very keen on, and it's something that can introduce tremendous economy of freight and time in passage from Europe to Asia as far as China is concerned. But really the most negative feature from an Indian perspective is the sudden spurt in Russia-India defense cooperation, which again today involves transfers of sophisticated weapon systems, intricate military exercises, and extensive military-to-military interactions. The most recent example is the sale of S-35 fighter jets, Su-35, fighter jets to China, which deliveries began in December 2016. A project which had been long stalled and which will provide China with technology an area of great concern for us since we are ourselves buying the S-400 system from Russia. And then there is the joint manufacture of helicopters, Russian engines for their 5th generation fighter aircraft. And I think something was said yesterday about the Beidou-GLONASS arrangement for interoperability for ballistic missile detection. Now, if this is true, this would be a very major step actually, because both China and Russia are very, very possessive and secretive about precision signals from their satellite systems, which are military applications. And that, if that is being shared, that would actually mean a quantitatively different level of the Russia-China military relations. It's something which bears watching. There is no confirmation of it as yet. Now, Russia has since maneuvered itself out of economic and has imposed it upon with the Iran nuclear deal, its activism in Syria, it's now taken center stage in a number of global issues. So it no longer has the same desperate need for Chinese support as it did before. We need to see what happens because of this, because we are at a stage where the developed relations, the development of Russia-China relations at this stage is maybe undergoing a turning point. Because we also see something that the Russians are doing now to balance relations with China. On OBOR, yes, President Putin has talked about this SREB, Eurasian Economic Union linkages, but he's also talking about the need for universal and generally recognized foundations, taking into account specifics of member states, openness and transparency, and Russia is very strongly today promoting the INSTC. It is promoting the Chabahar-Iran connection. Now, it was said that Iran is a very difficult partner. Yes, Iran is a difficult partner, but we have reached a stage where Iran now is quite keen to progress with Russia for a number of other reasons as well. This connectivity, and it's for India now to respond to it and to take this forward. In fact, this is a very, very important stage for us to take advantage of. Russia's relations with Vietnam are another example. They've gone ahead and signed gas contracts with Vietnam, and some of them are going to bring it, some of them are going to be in disputed areas in the South China Sea, and Vietnam has now moved to become the 3rd largest arms buyer from Russia after India and Nigeria, I think it is. Japan, tremendous strides in the relations with Japan. I think Prime Minister Abe is now beginning to compete with President Xi in the number of times that he meets President Putin. The number of meetings that they've had, they've been talking about the Kuril Islands, they've been talking about much the same formula as we used to say to the Chinese, that let's first develop all-round relations and that will make the solution of the border problem a little easier. So this kind of dialogue between Russia and Japan is taking place. So there is a lot of action that Russia is undertaking in order to balance this excessive dependence that it has on China and to establish itself as an independent pole. And there is this great this new initiative that President Putin launched in the St. Petersburg Forum in 2016. The concept of Russia as the concept of a greater Eurasia, at the center of which Russia will be. In fact, Foreign Minister Lavrov mentioned this at the lecture he gave in the VIF a few days ago. This sees Russia as a standalone power, drawing in Japan, China, India into some kind of a framework that would promote multipolarity and banking on this confidence that Russia is the least controversial in this. That China has problems with Japan, China has problems with India, Russia has individually good relations with all these, so you can build a structure and then building upon it for an economic partnership, and an economic partnership that would draw in ASEAN, India, Russia, Japan, India, China, Japan. So this is a shift from a Vladivostok to Lisbon economic partnership narrative to maybe Minsk to Manila economic partnership. And these are efforts that Russia is making. I mean, it is very early days, very difficult to to even predict where this will go forward. Now, how disruptive will the Russia-China nexus, if the Russia-China nexus really goes beyond this, how disruptive will it be to the Western world order? I think the answer is still in the air. The jury is out on this, because some of the worst apprehensions of a Russia-China condominium, if you like, in Asia have not really materialized. Both have been careful not to directly challenge the Western order, let alone being seen as collaborative. No, in fact, they're not drastically challenging the Western order. Let alone collaborating to try to upset it. Russia has not of a reset in its relations with the US and an economic and energy partnership with Europe. This is very clear if you follow President Putin's utterances over the last many months. China's support for Russia against Western sanctions have also been relatively low-key, because it really does not want to take on the US too overtly in its support for Russia. And also this Russia-China axis on the international scene has been grossly exaggerated. If you see, many of the things where Russia and China have actually worked together on are things that they have been working together on from the past, because they have shared interests. If you look at Syria, for example, or if you look at Korea, they have had similar ideas even before. And if you look at Afghanistan, much is made about the Russia-China axis on Afghanistan. Russia is not playing any Chinese game in Afghanistan. It's playing its own game in Afghanistan because it is basically countering the Americans in Afghanistan. It's part of the Russia-US standoff rather than a Russia-China axis. So, essentially, we have a situation where a Russia-China nexus was created very strongly in the early 2000s, but has not got to a stage where it is actually seeking to disrupt the Western order. I mean, I think the reading which you make of it as of today, we as India have to be concerned, of course, at the manifestations of some of this military cooperation that is taking place. We need, since we are shopping for the same arms with Russia, we need confidence, and we need somehow to get confidence from them that what they're giving to the Chinese is not the same as what they're giving to us. I presume China is seeking the same assurances from them as well.
Thank you, Ambassador Agrawal. I think it seems it's not just the Chinese, but the Russians who are also going to keep us all guessing for quite some time. Between them, they're injecting a fair amount of dynamism, which offers, I think, a lot of opportunities for other players. So this is a relationship which certainly is going to be watched. Now,
in the beginning, I will talk about the strategic importance of Egypt. After that, I will talk about the new stage in the China-Egypt relationship. And in the end, I talk about the strategic importance of the Suez Canal to the BRI. Egypt has always played a crucial role in global interaction when they are both in the MENA region. Hence, Chinese-Egyptian relations represent one of the most important bilateral relationships in the region. Egypt is a major regional power with an important and influential role in the Sunni axis and the Arab-Islamic world, and play an important role on the African continent too. As a key ally of Washington too also, it has a pivotal importance for the US in achieving its broader goals in the region. Unlike its other Middle Eastern partners, Beijing's economic ties when Egypt are not motivated by oil import, but by a geographical calculation. The Suez Canal has long been China's primary shipping route for sending goods to Europe, which is China's largest market. Since the Egyptian president Abdel Fattah el-Sisi took office in June 2014, after Egypt's military adopted the elected President Mohamed Morsi, the bilateral relationship elevated to a level of comprehensive strategic partnership. This new stage in bilateral relationship when Egypt represents for China as an emerging strategic alliance with one of the most important regional powers that can promote its aspiration to strengthen its influence and power in the MENA, expand its commerce activity, and reinforce its strategic standing and the expansion of the US. In 2016, the value trade between China and Egypt mounted $11.3 billion, ranking Egypt trade African trade partner when China. China investment in Egypt economy have recently increased to $700 million, ranking China fourth among the countries investing in Egypt. The number of Chinese companies operating in Egypt increased to more than 1,000 Chinese companies and now operate there in the industry, construction, and service. Beijing views Egypt as a key partner in the war against terrorism in the MENA and beyond. Egypt is one of the nations on the front line of the regional war on terrorism because of its struggle against jihadist extreme militant group operating in the Sinai Peninsula and giving its central role when the traditional Sunni camp. At the same time, China is demonstrating increasing concern over the threat posed by the ISIS and its desire to keep this threat from China's borders. When the extreme on rise, both nations face security challenge and are interested combining terrorism and extreme by providing intelligence, collective evidence, arresting and cutting off the source of terrorist funding. China viewed deeper diplomatic and strategic ties with Egypt as part of its agenda to expand its political influence and commercial ties globally. Given its regional influence and the geographic location, Egypt provides the gateway connecting to the African continent and its natural resources through agreement and trade exchange customs. This may create many investment opportunities for Chinese export to African market. Since 2000, China has emerged as Africa's largest trading partner and major source of investment finance as well. Large number of Chinese workers and companies have moved to Africa in recent years when estimate running as high as 1 million. Sino-African Economic Cooperation has diversified in the past few years and expanded to more fields include trade, infrastructure, industrial investment, finance, and logistics. China's direct investment in Africa is a highlight of Sino-African economic and trade cooperation in the past years. According to data from Chinese Ministry of Commerce, China's trade with African countries in 2016 stand at almost $115 billion. The Chinese investment in Africa has increased dramatically, making the country the single largest contributor of foreign direct investment, capital, and job in Africa. Thus, as a transcontinental country spanning Asia and Africa, Egypt is as an essential trade route for China, including as part of the Belt and Road Initiative that aim to bridge China, Europe, and Africa through infrastructure, transport, and communication. The Suez Canal has strategic great importance for Chinese One Belt, One Road Initiative, the most ambitious Chinese integration project to date, linking Asia with Europe and Africa along the land and sea-based Silk Road. In this sense, the Suez Canal is an important hub in the construction process of the BRI projects. This is due to its strategic geographic location along the Silk Road and its pivotal location in promoting China economic relations with African continent. China Belt and Road Initiative is composed of two components, the Silk Road Economic Belt SREB and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road Initiative MSRI. The former links China with Central Asia and Middle East and Europe on land, while the latter unit the major maritime trade routes of Africa, Europe, and Oceania, as well as the South and Southeast Asia. The two schemes are inseparable, and China's goal is to implement them in parallel. Each component has the potential to transfer the global geopolitical landscape through the construction of interland infrastructure projects, including air, seaport, highway, high-speed railroad, pipelines, track road. China's vision is to build a faster connectivity roads and increase trade along the land sea-based Silk Road. It promised then $1 trillion in infrastructure and span more than 16 countries and regions and about 63% of the world population. Furthermore, it has the potential to establish a new order, not only in Eurasia, but in the entire international system as well. Given its geographic location, the Suez Canal has increasingly strategic importance for promoting BRI, and it's very important to China's foreign trade conduct, serving Chinese foreign trade, 90% of which is carried out through the maritime roads. The Suez Canal has long been China's primary shipping route for sending goods to the European market. The Suez Canal is the first gateway to West Asia, European terminal in China, East Asia, and Southeast Asia market. That make the Suez Canal as a pivot or hubs for implementation of the BRI. Since the canal reduced the distance between Europe and the Far East by trade, and thus become a key link between the Pacific and Indian Ocean. Furthermore, the Suez Canal, one of the main hubs of the world maritime trade and the main transit point between the Indian Ocean, Red Sea, and the Mediterranean, represent the most important crossroad for sending goods to European market, and it features some of the major Mediterranean seaports such as Alexandria and Port Said. The Suez Canal also has a particularly crucial role in the implementation of the MSRI because of its strategic location. It connects the continents of Africa and Asia and represents an Asian portal for the African and Arab world, and African portal for Europe through the Mediterranean Sea. The MSRI linked China port facility when the African coast entering into the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal. As such, the Suez Canal has been elevated to a springboard position in China's aspiration to create a new seaport trade network for access to the European market via the Mediterranean ports. Since the new Suez Canal opened in 2015, the Egyptian government has planning to upgrade ports and undertake infrastructure projects and industrial development in the region. Beijing sees this as an opportunity to boost its role global shipping and to turn Egypt's major ports into an important key hubs that will serve as a gateway for Chinese products to Europe. In order to ensure reliable access for Chinese commercial shipping from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, China's shipping company have invested heavily in ports along the Suez Canal corridor from the Gulf of Suez to Port Said in Egypt. COSUCO, China's largest state-owned shipping company, invested $185.6 million in joint venture to operate and manage the Suez Canal container terminal in Port Said Eastport, located in the western Sinai Peninsula at the northern end of the canal. The Chinese Harbor States Company invested $219 million in Port Said Eastport and Al Dabia Port as the Suez Canal southern end. China is also one of the largest foreign investors in Suez Canal Corridor Era project, and 86 Chinese companies have invested totaling more than $1.1 billion in the era. Beijing is rapidly becoming a strategic actor in the MENA, and its BRI projects are accelerating this development. Although its key interests in the region remain economic rather than security focused. However, China's ambition to build land and sea infrastructure across Eurasia and the Indian Ocean, linking China with the Mediterranean Sea region, means security considerations are gaining importance. China is aware that once the Suez Canal is upgraded and under China observed, it will have a considerable control, influence, power, and potential to shape security and commercial dynamic in the region. Therefore, when Beijing investment billions of dollars in Suez Canal infrastructure as part of the implementation of the BRI project, it has to take into account the strategic interest of other major powers in the region, especially the US, which is the predominant power there. It is important to Beijing to promote the BRI without challenging American regional dominance, because this could arouse the US to intervene in order to undermine or obstruct their project.
Thank you, giving but listening to you, one part of it is of course the sheer numbers that keep coming. I mean, the amount of investment that is going in there, and it's quite mind-boggling. After a while, I think the numbers stop making sense. It's just about this great vision of using the Suez Canal. But the other part, when I was listening to your paper on this Suez Canal, the significance of the Suez Canal in China's One Belt, One Road initiative, and recalling this whole discussion about the narrative and how the narrative is also very significant in the way in which the entire perceptions evolve. And it occurs to me this One Belt, One Road formulation is actually an appropriation of history of practically the whole world. And maybe the narrative should be changed to many belts, many roads. And since it is about connectivity, and since countries across the world are interested in connectivity, it should be about many belts, many roads, and many histories. So maybe we should start changing the narrative from one belt, one road to many belts. But Professor Arase will now make a presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Victoria. It's a real pleasure to be here. If you think of the Suez Canal as being the far western limit of the Indo-Pacific, Northeast Asia is the northeastern sector of the Indo-Pacific. We're talking about one integrated maritime region now, economically, in terms of transportation, and also strategically, because what happens in Northeast Asia strategically is going to affect the entire region following that. Because, as you know, U.S. military powers in this region is controlled from Hawaii and from PACOM in Hawaii, and it extends all the way to the Persian Gulf. So certainly in terms of practice, from the U.S. point of view, strategically, it is one way. All right. Okay, so I was assigned this topic by Javan, and so I did it. I wrote a paper. I intended it to be about 5,000 words. It turned into 12,000. If anybody wants a bedtime reading, just give me your card and I'll send it to you. So, as far as maintaining order, upsetting order, in terms of what China's doing, I think a better way to put it would be to say China is attempting to restore a China-centered order. And this will necessarily require upsetting liberal the international order led by the U.S. And China hopes to do this peacefully. But Xi Jinping has also told us, because of his idea of the principal bottom line, that China's rise will remain peaceful, but it will never compromise its sovereign interests, its core interests, and it's prepared to use force to secure them. That's the principal bottom line. So this is his approach now to pursuing his vision of the Chinese dream. Now, preceding Xi Jinping's appointment to power, under Hu Jintao, we saw the first serious signs of this strategic effort by China to sort of displace U.S. strategic predominance in the region using so-called A2AD, developing A2AT capabilities, ballistic, carrier killer missiles, things like that. But also in terms of the inner seas, the coastal seas, the Yellow, East China Sea, South China Sea, Chinese tactics to claim ownership of these seas and occupy and control the surface. And in fact, begin harassing U.S. naval ships in their normal operations. So the Obama administration, in the person of Hillary Clinton, suggested at the 2010 ARF meeting that maybe the U.S. could help mediate the situation. The response, as you all know, of the Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi was angrily tell the U.S. to stay out of matters that don't concern you. And this eventually provoked the U.S. to pivot, the so-called strategic pivot that Obama announced in 2011. Now, what's interesting is that barely a month after Obama announced this in Australia, Xi Jinping paid a visit to Washington, D.C., an informal visit as vice president, and he gave a speech in which he called for a new type of great power relationship with the U.S., which subsequently became a mantra. But this was part of Xi Jinping's response. This calls for a win-win, no conflict relationship between the U.S. and China, in which each side will respect the core interests of the other side. And of course, China's core interests reside in Asia, America, because the U.S. is not an Asian. Its core interests will reside elsewhere. Xi Jinping also called for a community of common destiny, a new idea of community, and of course the infrastructure for this would be the Belt and Road Initiative. He also called in July 2013, he convened a high-level work meeting, and he made a speech saying that to achieve the Chinese dream, we must become a great power. And he also enunciated a new concept of Asian security at the 2014 CIPA summit in Shanghai. According to this concept of security, only Asian countries have a legitimate role in managing Asian security affairs. Cold War thinking, meaning area U.S. alliances have no role in Asia, and peace should be underwritten by economic development. And if any conflicts do, they're solely by the countries directly involved. Okay, so this is China's general conception of regional order, and it's, of course, Northeast Asia is where you're first seeing a concerted effort by China to implement. So, in other words, what's happening in Northeast Asia should be a concern to everybody throughout the region. Now, in terms of how to operationalize this new concept of Asian order under China, China has the problem of removing U.S. strategic predominance peacefully, and how to actually do that without provoking war. So one thing to bear in mind, however, at the start of this discussion is that through the Cold War, but also even after the Cold War, stability and order in Northeast Asia has been maintained by a military balance of power. And you see this in particular, the 4 points actually now. The Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Strait, those are two well-known ones. But Diaoyudao, or the Senkaku Islands is yet another one. And this new issue of nuclear proliferation in North Korea. So we now have four very difficult points of strategic tension to manage. In each case, the military balance of forces plays an important role in determining its management and ultimate outcome. What I'll do is I'll briefly go over each of these four hot points, and each one is very complicated. I only have 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes left, so I'll just give you short takeaways. Now, the nuclearization of North Korea serves China's interests more than it hurts China's interests. Now, of course, nuclearization hurts China's principled opposition to nuclear proliferation. On the other hand, nuclearization solves some problems. It could allow North Korea to remain secure without China having to fight another war to defend it. It also, a nuclear North Korea, particularly one that could hit the U.S. homeland, would also question the credibility of U.S. security guarantees in the region, and make it very easy then to sort of Finlandize or remove or undermine U.S. alliances in the region. I'll just, there are other things I could say, but I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll just move on. Now, as far as the East China Sea, or actually, let me just say something about South Korea. Now, South Korea is in a peculiar situation because it's so vulnerable to Chinese pressure. It's so dependent on the Chinese economy. China's ally, North Korea, is a grave existential threat to the South. And China, of course, assures the South that we will help keep you safe. We will urge our North Korea to remain peaceful, etc. And this, of course, has great appeal to the South because ultimately the South wants to reunify with the North. And also there are certain tensions in South Korea's relations with Japan and with the U.S. because of history. So South Korea has been convinced, if you've been following the news, to recently declare the 3 no's. Even though South Korea has deployed the THAAD anti-missile system, Moon has assured China that he will deploy no more THAAD missiles. These THAAD missiles will not be used against China. So in other words, basically, South Korea will not use its alliance with the U.S. to do anything anti-China, and that South Korea will not participate in any regional missile defense system run by the U.S. So basically, what South Korea is doing is redefining the alliance into one where the alliance with the U.S. is directed only against the North and not directed toward regional stability, and general regional stability. And this is a little problematic. Now, Japan, since 2010, well, actually even before that, because of this gas field, the Shirakawa gas field, or Chunxiao gas field in the East China Sea, but then after that, in 2010, and the Senkaku Islands and Gyeonggi-do Islands, Japan has been, China has been violating Japanese sovereignty and sovereign rights pretty much at will, with impunity, because the transgressions and violations occur below the threshold of military force, and so it does not trigger U.S. alliance response. And this, of course, is meant to undermine U.S. credibility, to create alliance frictions. Taiwan is an interesting and complicated question, where Xi Jinping has actually, I think, encountered a serious setback in 2016 with the defeat of the KMT and the landslide victory of the DPP, winning both the presidency and the legislature, which removed the basis of China's Taiwan policy, which was dialogue based on something called the 1992 Consensus and the One China Principle. So, and oddly, that situation has lasted for about 2 years now. Okay, so this is the situation. Now, I go over this to suggest that looking at the whole situation from China's point of view, and maybe from the point of view of the CPC, Xi Jinping has been very successful, and he was rewarded at the 19th Party Congress. However, the regional situation is increasingly tense and unstable. You can see it particularly in North Korea today. And China has never been more disliked by the Northeast Asian neighbors. So, looking at it from outside of China, it doesn't appear to be that successful, but perhaps, it's a matter of perception, what you value. If your priority is to sort of shake things up and inch the U.S. out, maybe this is a great success. If your metric is peace and stability and harmony, maybe it's not. Okay, but it's a matter of perception. Now, what about the strategic impact of all this? Well, I think as far as U.S.-China relations is concerned, I don't really think that Trump and any succeeding president is going to be as accommodating as Obama was. And that if you look at what's happening today in the U.S. with respect to attitudes towards China, whether it's the WTO or whether it's military affairs or human rights issues, things like this, the sentiment is beginning to strongly turn against China. And so what I'm suggesting is that the period of strategic opportunity for China, which Chinese had thought would last until about 2020, seems to be ending a little early. That is to say, the EU, Japan, and Europe are reportedly joining forces in the WTO to oppose Chinese trade practices. They're beginning to collaborate, dealing with Chinese investments in high technology sectors. The fact that the U.S. really isn't asking for Chinese permission to use force in North Korea is also a bit of a setback for China as well. So, at the strategic level, I think that you are seeing consequences of this kind of pressure being applied in North Asia. Regionally, the situation is more tense, less stable. And then in terms of national security, the security of individual actors, whether it's Taiwan, South Korea, or Japan, they look at this as vital national security issues at stake, and they certainly feel less secure today. So, with that, I will end. I think I have to take a little more than I should have, but I kind of feel like I said the absolute minimum of what I should have said. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Arasi, for that extremely complex picture that you have drawn out of Northeast Asia. Clearly the last remaining theater of Cold War, I would say. I wonder what people here might make of your view that the nuclearization has actually been good for China. So that's
debate.
But that's an interesting position you took. So I now request Ambassador Vishwanathan to make his presentation. His interesting contribution to the hallowed portals of South Block, I'm told, was Latino music when he was there. So I think there will be some interesting presentation.
I guess the topic of Latin America's amigo-vio relationship with China needs an explanation, a Latino explanation. an American country music singer, Lee Ann Womack, has a song, 20 years and 2 husbands ago. 20 years and 2 husbands ago. It's based on a personal life story of 2 failed marriages. You can imagine the lyrics. She swears she will never again fall in for another wedding ring and end up suffering. Latin America has gone through a similar experience. Not 2 marriages, but 1.5 marriages. One full-fledged formal marriage, another one what the Latinos call más o menos marriage. It's more or less marriage. The first marriage was to Europe, to Spain and Portugal for 300 years. When Napoleon overran Spain and Portugal, the Latin Americans quickly declared the marriage is void, my husband is missing, and declared independence. But this independence was short-lived. In 1823, a macho from the north came in announcing Monroe Doctrine and claimed más o menos marriage with the Latin America, claiming possession and control, and abused the region in the name of wars on communism, drugs, and the latest war on corruption. It went on for about 108 years. In the 21st century, Latin America has reinvented itself, become democracies from dictatorship, turned around the economies, and become assertive. So I asked a Brazilian friend of mine, what happened to your más o menos marriage with the North? He told me a story. Exxon, the big hat, came to Rio de Janeiro, walked in the beach Ipanema, and found a garota de Ipanema, the girl from Ipanema, fell in love with her, proposed marriage, married, and took her to Houston, and the first day in the evening, so the Exxon calls the Brazilian wife and says, hey, come here. I'll explain to you the 3 rules of our marriage. Number 1, I am the boss. Number 2, I will do anything I like, go wherever I like, no questions. Number 3, as and when I come back, whether it is 2 in the morning or 3, food should be ready, warm, on the table, and you should be there to serve it. So this Brazilian garota said, "Si, senor, no problem. You have any questions?" He said, "Yeah, I have. Since you have put 3 conditions, I have 1 small condition." "What's that?" So the Brazilian looks at him and says, "You see the bedroom there? There will be sex every night at 9 o'clock, whether you are there or not." So that is the state of marriage with the macho in the north. Now, it was at this inflection point, turning point, transformation, China came in as a new suitor with a very large dowry, cash, credit, investment. So the Latinos told the Chinese, "No te prometo amor eterno, porque no puedo. Soy un cazador de mariposas, tripulante de nubes. I don't promise you eternal love because I cannot. I am a hunter of butterflies and flyer in the clouds." So the Latin Americans proposed a new form of relationship, and that is amigovio. Amigovio means amigo, friend, novi homophobia, so between the two, which means no possession, no control, no dominance, no surrender, no emotion, no commitment, no declaration of fidelity. There is an Argentine TV serial called Amigobio, which came in 1995. And there is a Hollywood film of Justin Timberlake, Friends with Benefits, which came in 2011. Now let me tell you the dowry which came from China. Trade. The Chinese have become the second largest trading partner of Latin America, overtaking European Union. And they are the largest trading partner for Brazil, Chile, and Peru. The trade last year was $215 billion, of which 113 was Chinese exports, 102 imports. And in fact, it was $264 billion in 2014. Now, the Chinese have announced that this would be taken to $500 billion by 2025. Now, it is not just a commercial transaction. The Chinese import of large volumes of commodities from Latin America increased the prices, and it was a windfall for Latin America. The copper price, for example, rose from $1,000 to $8,000 per ton. The iron ore from $50 to $180. So the dollars were raining in South America. And this was used for the pro-poor policies to bring out 50 million people out of poverty line. Now, this Chinese large imports and giving dollars to Latin America was the most crucial part for the turnaround of Latin America into 21st century Latin America with a new paradigm of growth. In fact, they call the first decade as the decade of growth, in contrast to the last decade during the Washington Consensus times in 1980s. But for China's large imports, Latin America would not have been able to turn around like this so quickly. Now, credit. Till January 2017, China has given a credit of $141 billion, of which $100 billion has gone to energy, about $24 billion to infrastructure. The largest is to Venezuela, $62 billion. Brazil, $37 billion. Ecuador, $17 billion. Argentina, $15 billion. Even Bolivia, $3.5 billion. But here again, it is not the commercial part of credit which is important. For Latin America, what was important was that it was rescue at desperate times for some countries. And China was the lender of last resort. You know, when Argentina declared default in 2002, the Washington Consensus Mafia ganged up against Argentina, and they would not allow them access international capital finance. They were shut up. It was China which came to their rescue. In fact, the vulture funds, you know, when they cut the $100 to $30 as part of debt restructuring, 98% of the creditors had agreed to the 30% cut because still they made money. But 2% of the vulture, 2% of the creditors, who are the vulture funds, they were harassing Argentina to an unimaginable extent. Once they got an Argentine naval ship impounded in Ghana, and the Argentine President Cristina Kirchner never went by her own aircraft to anywhere because there was the fear that it might be impounded. Now, Brazil, when it went through this car wash crisis, started in 2014, the Wall Street guys wanted to drive the bonds and shares of Petrobras the lowest so that they can make a killing. And Petrobras needed $10 billion urgently to pay off some bond. It was China which came and gave $10 billion. And Venezuela, which got the $62 billion, it would have collapsed long back, but for the Chinese credit to Venezuela. Investment. Till January 2017, the estimate is $110 billion, of which 80% has come from state-owned enterprises, and most of it through Cayman Islands and the usual routes. $61 billion out of this $110 billion have gone to Brazil. While in the beginning, the investment had gone mostly to energy and mining, in the last couple of years, utilities and services sector have attracted 50% of the Chinese investment. For example, the Chinese have invested in the power sector in Brazil $7 billion. Power stations, transmission lines, and the whole grid network. The Chinese have come out with some mega projects. One is called Bioceanic Railway from Rio de Janeiro to the Peruvian, connecting Atlantic and Pacific. $5 billion. And more interestingly, Nicaragua Canal Project, $50 billion. If it materializes, it would be the largest construction project in contemporary world. Now, these are statements to Latin America that China is coming in as a constructive development partner, whereas the other one, across, is coming out with a destructive agenda of wars and terrorism, discovering terrorists in Mexico and Paraguay and Brazil. So, this is the message they want to give to the Latin American people. Despite this large dowry, Latin America has, with their experience of the last 17 years of China's presence, they have discovered some of the downsides. Number one, they found that China also behaved like the previous husbands. Like, for example, when Argentina imposed anti-dumping duty on a few goods worth a few $1 million from China, the Chinese wanted to teach them a lesson. They stopped the import of soya oil from Argentina. Argentina is the largest exporter of soya oil in the world, and China at that time was importing something close to $3 billion. It is cutting and brought it down to about $300 million. Of course, we went in because the prices were good. And in Brazil, when Vale, the mining company, they built these big ships called Vale Max, like super tankers carrying millions of tons of iron ore, which can be delivered cheaply to the Chinese. They can produce cheap steel and destroy the Brazilian steel industry. But when the construction had already started and when they were about to start, the Chinese said, oh no, the Vale Max ships cannot come to China. Environmental implications or technical problems. In 2009, you might remember the H1N1 virus, Mexico. The Mexicans were treated like dirt by China, and the Mexicans felt more humiliated than by the one across. Second, the flooding of Chinese goods have hurt the domestic industry. Thousands of factories have closed down in Latin America. And the third, the Chinese started scaring the Latin Americans. When a Chinese entrepreneur came to Rio Negro province in Argentina and wanted to buy 400,000 hectares of land. He had gone, stand on a hill and said, I want to buy the whole thing. So the South Americans started imposing restrictions on acquisition of land by foreigners. And also they fear some kind of hidden agenda. There are also, besides illegal migrants, there are so many illegal immigrants. In Buenos Aires, in and around the greater Buenos Aires, there are about 10,000 Chinese shops, supermarkets, neighborhood shops. And they only know pesos and the numbers, and they don't speak Spanish, many of them. They are first generation Chinese. And of course, the last is the cultural and communication. The Latin Americans, they have a word in Spanish called cuente chino, which literally in Spanish means Chinese story. But between us, it means bullshit. Now, the Nicaragua Canal project, why it is a dazzling, large project, the Latin Americans look at it and say, what is there? You know, Nicaragua is ruled by the Marxist Ortega, and he refuses to recognize China. He recognizes only Taiwan. Now, in that country, you are going to invest $50 billion, and the guy, the billionaire who is going to invest some Beijing, he has no experience in construction, he is in some telecom, his assets came from $10 billion to $1 billion. And you can't do a $50 billion project by a single entrepreneur. You need the state behind. So the Latin Americans say, Nicaragua Canal, it's a cuente chino. Now, the Latin Americans have decided that they should reduce their over-dependence on China and minimize their risk. And that is where India comes. In 2014, India was the third largest destination of Latin American exports. $40 billion after US and China. In 2016, India was the sixth largest destination, ahead of any European country. Exports to India was $16.7 billion. Exports to Germany, 14.4. To Spain, $13.5 billion. To UK, $10 billion. France and Italy, less than $10 billion. So they see India as a large growing market and a new partner. And they are comfortable with Indian culture. Yoga, meditation, gurus. I just give you two examples of French. The Latin Americans have taken Indian spiritualism to a new level. In Buenos Aires, there is a nightclub, there is a band called Yoga Rave which plays. But it's a new kind of nightclub. About 600-700 young adolescents there. But this Yoga Rave group sings in pure Sanskrit. They, of course, they use pop, rock, hip-hop, but pure Sanskrit. And when they play, there is no non-vegetarian food, no alcohol, no smoking, and no etc. And in between the songs, there's a guy who comes and asks people to do meditation, yoga, and so on. You know, in India, my son says, you have reached the age of yoga. But the Latin Americans have taken yoga and meditation and Sanskrit to a young generation, adolescent teens in nightclub, which you can't do in India. The second example, there's a Brazilian called Fernandes de Oliveira from Sao Paulo. You know those typical stereotype Brazilian who dances samba in carnival and drinks a beer called Brahma beer. It's a popular brand in Brazil, Brahma beer. He married at the age of 33. For his honeymoon, he came to India. He went to Rishikesh. Everything changed. He found a guru and he stopped drinking Brahma beer and started drinking Ganga Jal. He renounced his marital status, left his wife, became a sannyasi, and joined a Sacha Dham ashram in Rishikesh. And they have anointed him as the 5th guru of Sacha Dham ashram. And Fernandez de Oliveira has become Sri Prem Baba. Thank you.
Thanks, Master Vishwanathan, scintillating as ever. But I think it's a very good depiction of the rather mixed kind of picture about the Chinese role in the different regions, and I think that was brought out very well. Friends with benefits, sure, but there are a whole lot of unintended consequences, and those are very well brought out. Though I'm not too sure whether switching from Brahma beer to Ganga Jal was such a good idea. I mean, given the state of India. But now, with those wonderful 4 presentations, I'm going to request the organizers to give us 10 more minutes so that we can have 20 minutes of Q&A. So I had said 10 minutes, which would take us to 5:40. 10 minutes for Q&A, so can I take 10 more minutes? No. It's not fair, 4 people out here, and the next session in any case has only 2. Yeah. You're right, I'm the chair. Okay, so floor is open to... Yes, it's open. Professor Mohanty, I recognize you first.
Thank you for an excellent panel. Ambassador Raghavan, just to check about the admission of South Africa to BRICS. You said the Chinese got them to BRICS. I mean, true, the Hainan meeting decided to admit them, but the IFSA forum was already there. The RIC in an informal way was already functioning, and therefore the joining of South Africa to BRICS was, you know better, so I would like to know whether that's the thing, that the Chinese got the South Africans to BRICS. That's one. The David, excellent depiction of the disruption as well as the creation of this order. But you premised it by saying that it's restoration of the Chinese world order. And this theme has not come so prominently, fortunately, in my view, in the last 2 days' deliberations. But do you subscribe to the view of the Sinocentric world order re-emerging, or you would like to qualify that? Thank you.
My question to David Arasi. It's about North Korea. If you recall, President Trump during the campaign had always said that he could sit down and talk with Kim Jong-il. Thereafter, we've had some noises a couple of times from Tillerson saying that it would be good to talk to the North Koreans. There was a statement lately, a few days ago again. But on the other hand, there's a contradictory approach which one sees as far as the president is concerned. So where is the United States on that? And what do you think will happen as far as talks or negotiations or talks about talks itself?
On the nuclear issue, when you said, you said both the options. I mean, one, it could be good for China, it could be bad for China. But looking at bad for China, what if it leads to the nuclearization of South Korea and in Japan. In fact, you think from the American perspective, they have better leverage, not by threatening to use force, but by engaging in a direct deal with Kim Jong-un. And to threaten that they will encourage Japan and South Korea to go nuclear, rather than saying they'll bomb you to Stone Age, because they can't do it. They've been deterred already. So what are the prospects of the other way this could, shall we say, the Dennis Rodman option?
Good afternoon, sir. My question is to Ambassador Raghavan, sir, regarding China-Russia relationship, which you said sometime at some peak 2014-15 onwards. We saw in September 2015 Vladimir Putin going for the victory parade. Immediately as Russians went in Syria, why is it that Russians have not been able to galvanize any support for their military intervention in Syria? And now that the Russian says the chapter is closed and operations are over, is it that it's time for Chinese to regret as why did not they go along with them? They would have got some credits for having some success in internationally when brought them up to a higher plateau. Thank you.
Also on Russia-China relations. Basically, I want to understand whether there are fault lines in Russia-China relations which may become apparent, not now, maybe 15 years, 5 years, 10 years, because if you look at the history, it's been problematic. Similar question.
Let's take it in the second round. Yeah, sure. So the questions already come in, so we have and then
Oh, okay. So, the Sino-centric order, in the paper I deal with this question, and basically the Chinese dream is an imagined past and an imagined future. It doesn't really have any reality outside of the CPC's collective imagination, But and certainly China's neighbors don't remember Asian history the way China does, and they don't imagine the future the same way China does. So. Looking forward, I don't really think China's neighbors welcome this order, and the present sort of liberal order isn't perfect. Nobody's happy, not even the U.S. is happy with it, but it seems to be better or preferable to what China's offering today. So, and that keeps, by the way, these countries aligned. That is South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the U.S. keeps them aligned. And I think rather firmly in the end. I'll just stop with that. And then, as far as the North Korea question is, in U.S. policy, what is the policy? Well, Trump does not want to be transparent. His whole approach is to be unpredictable and non-transparent. He plays the fool to fools who want to fool him. Okay, so this is his whole approach to making deals. And but I think right now we're at the point where I don't really think the U.S. wants to accept nuclear North Korea, and I think that there's some determination, in fact, to not accept it. And even Moon has publicly said he will not, South Korea will not accept nuclear North Korea. Japan has said that. The U.S. has said it. And if you look at the kind of exercises that are being done now around the peninsula, these are rather these are unprecedented. So, this of course is part of coercive diplomacy, right? But it may actually end up with the use of force. I think there's a possibility of this. Richard Armitage said, it must be at least a month ago now, there's a 30% chance. And I think that percentage has gone up. And in fact, because it's gone up, China has sent a member of the Central Military Commission to the U.S. to Washington to confer with the Pentagon just after the missile launch. And then last week they sent the Vice Foreign Minister unannounced to Washington for discussions. And so there's a lot going on. And Tillerson has said that in his widely reported remarks that he's willing to talk to the North unconditionally. He also said that he's had discussions with China over cooperation in the event that force is used in the North. And I've participated in workshops in China with Koreans, South Koreans, and Chinese about this question. And I can tell you, there is discussion about these scenarios and the division of responsibilities amongst them. So who would grab what? So the situation is very fluid and I think rather tense. So we don't really know how it's going to turn out. And I think perhaps even Trump doesn't know how it's going to turn out. But certainly, I mean, there is a chance that the North at the last minute will turn around and say, okay, we'll negotiate denuclearization. But I don't really think that's going to happen. So we'll just see how it turns out.
Thank you. The easiest question is about China bringing South Africa into BRICS. I think it's now fairly well accepted that it's China, through the prime mover behind it. China suggested it. It was very difficult for us to raise any objection to it at that time. You cannot be seen to be opposing South Africa. But if you look at it, actually South Africa does not fit into the BRICS pattern at all. In terms of economic clout, in terms of political clout, and that argument that you need to have a continental balance. If you needed to have a continental balance, there was Nigeria there in Africa. So really speaking, it was, one can say that, a very unsuitable entrant into BRIC in terms of the profile of the BRIC countries. And it arose out of a visit that Jacob Zuma made to China, and that's where I believe it was promised to him along with the various other inducements, etc. Military intervention, actually I didn't quite understand the question about Russian military intervention in Syria. Actually, the Russian military intervention in Syria took place with the tacit acquiescence of all the Western countries, actually. You know, if you look at the sequence, 29th of September 2015, President Putin was in New York having a long conversation with President Obama, which was something like 6 hours or something. 30th September, he came back to Russia, he ordered the military strikes into Syria. 2nd October, he had a very important Normandy 4 meeting with the French and the German leaders, along with Ukraine. Now, if he had not been sure of their tacit acquiescence, he would not have done it at that time, President Putin, I mean, because he would not have wanted to jeopardize the 2nd October meeting, which was not jeopardized. The meeting went ahead. You see, the chorus of criticism that came out, also it's very educative. It came out first from Ash Carter, who was the person, the defense secretary, who was the person who had actually admitted that the American initiative to arm Syrian rebels had failed. Their investment actually had gone down the drain. These people had either deserted or taken the arms and given them to terrorists. Subsequently, when the American administration started getting criticized for having handed over the initiative to the Russians, that's when they started saying that, you know, human rights will be violated, civilian targets will be made, they're not actually going after ISIS, they're going after Assad's opponents, etc., etc., etc. From the way the narrative developed, it was obvious that it was actually, you know, Russians go in and perhaps make a mess of it and blaming the Russians, and if they can get something out of the various disparate groups that were being supported by the Qataris, the Saudis, the Turks, and so on, so much the better for it. So it was a very complex situation in which Russia went in. And the situation remains complex. There's all kinds of military complications even today. So I don't see China. I don't see any reason for China to have come into it. This is a Russian game. This is a Russian game once again, which China supported tacitly, but did not really overtly get involved in it. So there was from time to time some statements saying some people say China involved in Syria. Fault lines that Arvind talked about. Well, look, there are these fault lines which are glaring you in the face, and yet today's experience do not seem to live up to fault lines. We talked about the strategic, even Russia and China Russia and China have to be competitors for strategic space. They have to be long-term strategic adversaries, strategic rivals. And the only problem is that the question that we keep asking all the time is, has that embrace not become far too intimate for the disengagement to be difficult? Since the language of marriages and divorces is popular, when you come when invest so much, how do you divorce? The divorce will be equally messy. And if you are talking about these intimate energy linkages, and even more so the military linkages, there comes a point when it becomes far more difficult and far more messy to disengage. And that is the worry that we ought to have. That is the worry actually that Japan and the rest of Asia ought to have, and even Europe ought to have, about not letting the Russia-China embrace come to a level where the natural fault lines get disguised or get papered over.
I'm Avinash from ICWA. My question was from Mr. Raghavan on the China-Russia competition or the direction of China-Russia relations in Central Asia, basically. So related to what you just spoke, which way it is going, as you see?
So my question is to Ambassador Raghavan. Sir, there is a certain Chinese angle to India's relationship with Vietnam and Russian relationship with Vietnam. So given China's growing assertiveness, do you think there is a space for Russia, India, Vietnam trilateral? The reason I'm asking this question because I posed this question to a Russian official in the New Delhi embassy, and he was quite positive about it. Thank you, sir.
My question is to Ambassador P.S. Raghavan. Last year there has been some kind of an improvement in the relations between Russia and Pakistan. So, your comments on that?
You know, if you ask, these days the Russians often tell you about their partnership with China and Central Asia, that we look after the military and security aspects of in Central Asia, and China looks after the economic aspect. It's a wonderful way of making a division, but it's not something that can work. China has made deep inroads into Central Asia, which Russia has been hard put to match. This is also what Dr. Gupta said. This is again one of the fault lines. You know, the BRI coming into Central Asia will actually cut very deeply into Russian influence in Central Asia. So Russia, while paying lip service to it, will want to control the development of BRI in Central Asia in a manner that it does not affect its interests, and that's not going to be a very easy task. It's going to be quite difficult. Russia, India, Vietnam, that's very good. In fact, we have excellent relations with Vietnam. We have a strategic partnership with Vietnam, so does Russia. The point is, you don't have a trilateral for the sake of having a trilateral. What do you do? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to signal? Now, you know, if Russia, India, Vietnam are getting together to signal some kind of an opposition to China or saying that you want to contain China, I think it's a no-no from all three. None of the three will want to do it. It has to have a purpose. It has to have a certain logic to it. So while we have excellent relations with Vietnam, so does Russia, and we are assisting Vietnam in various ways, and we are cooperating with Vietnam in various ways, and there is always China at the back of our minds, and the same with Russia and Vietnam. There is no need to have a trilateral to make a point. Russia, Pakistan. This is an old one and a repeated one. Look, the thing is that in the Cold War we had a certain alignment of forces which, according to which we were tied to the Soviet Union and Pakistan was tied to America. Now, what the end of the Cold War has done is freed up our capacity and our room for maneuver to develop relations on a much broader scale. So we have much wider network of relationships. We have relationships with Europe, we have relationships with the US, we have strategic partnerships with a wide range of countries, and we are therefore trying to diversify our relationships. So if you talk about Russia, then even our military acquisitions, we are now trying to diversify because we'd like to get access to the best military technology. So when you have given up exclusivity of relations with Russia, why do you expect Russia to have an exclusivity of relations with you? So Russia also develops relations across countries, and as Russia seeks to be a great power, you don't tell this great power that look, you can deal with one country in this region and not with the other countries in this region. And whatever you say, Pakistan has an influence in this region, has an influence in the Middle East. Now, all you can ask for of a strategic partner is that it has sensitivity to your core interests and to your core concerns. And that is how you judge a relationship, not by what the country has, what relations the country has with other countries. Of course, US is supplying arms to Pakistan, France is supplying arms to Pakistan, you're dealing with the US and France, why apply a different standard to Russia? As I said, the ultimate standard is that the strategic partnership should protect your core interests and core interests of both sides. That's basically it.
Well, thank you. I think it says something for the range of questions that the bandwidth still spans Asia. From here to here. We still have not gone beyond to Latin America and looking at the mouth, what's happening. I think it's indicated like somewhere of the way in which we are focused on what the Chinese are doing in Asia. As for myself, I end this session enlightened, of course, but I look from the global to the regional and regional to the global, and it's already not at all sure which is which.